What's up, everybody? It's Dakota, and today I'm going to be going over one of the pillars of the modern format, a deck that everybody just knows about, and something that's been kind of a meme slash rising in popularity. It's been there, done that. The boogeyman of the format when it was conceived, and now kind of rising back into prominence as one of the best and probably greatest mid range decks, at least in color combination, to ever be really played in any sort of format. And it's classic Jund. Jund is essentially like a deck that just tries to outvalue your opponent with your threats. Like you 2-for-1 them to death, and you just get so much value that it's hard for your opponents to keep up. So, really, just kind of going through it, you can see cards like Dark Confidant, has been a staple of Magic since it was printed back in original Ravnica, all the way to getting reprinted in Modern Masters 2015. And this is basically a way that it gets to draw extra cards. Revealing the top card of your library, you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Obviously, since the deck has evolved, like you're only ever really worried about hitting Bloodbraid Elf, and still you only lose 4. And the value that this card generates, being a 3/2 haste, that lets you cast a spell that costs 3 or less, at least from how the mechanic Cascade works, and being a hit with all of your things. The classic plays are always like turn 4, playing a Bloodbraid Elf into a Liliana of the Veil, and now even Bloodbraid Elf into like Ren and 6, or like Bloodbraid into Cooligan's Command, are all really powerful because it helps you and generate that 2-for-1, and can sometimes even get you a 3-for-1 or 4-for-1 off of just playing like a Bloodbraid Elf. So this is just kind of like Jund's mantra. This card was banned for a while. It was unbanned at the same time that Jace the Mind Sculptor was unbanned. And while it did not warp the format like people thought Jace and Bloodbraid would do, it's still very powerful and a very good addition to the deck that has been a staple of the archetype before it was banned, and then after it got unbanned, it's just found its way in full force at 4. Tarmogoyf, the premier like green mid-range creature, when Fatal Push was printed, like everybody went nuts over it because finally we have like a 1 mana spell that like doesn't punish you for playing Path to Exile by obviously giving your opponent a land. Fatal Push just outright killing Tarmogoyf was big, kind of made it fall out of favor as like the premier green creature of the format, and just the premier creature in general because Fatal Push was so rampant. But even to this day, playing a 2 mana 4/5 or a 2 mana 3/4 that ends up being a 4/5 on your turn 3, by the time it attacks, and can even grow upwards as an 8/9 is as big as it can be. But just in like Jund and how the format shifted, like it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that Tarmogoyf ends up on average being a 5/6 for 2, which is pretty good considering we have 3 mana 7/6s now that run around in standard and things like that. So like Tarmogoyf is an amazing and probably one of the best 2-drop creatures that you could be playing in modern, as well as probably one of the best 2-drop green creatures you can be playing in the format. Speaking of the 2-drop green creatures, we also have Scavenging Ooze, which is really good against some of the graveyard decks. They're running around Jund. Well, it's not. I don't think it's super popular, but definitely just getting to eat things out of the graveyard. Your opponent's basically trying to be on like the same mid-range plan, or if you're like the red blitz deck, and obviously you'll see like the suite of removals we have in the deck. But like Scavenging Ooze can just get big, gain you life in those situations, and just get big and be very hard to deal with in the mid to late game. So, and it's, again, another one of those cards that just gives you a ton of value if the game goes on. The Planeswalkers, because these are really sweet. Ren and 6, or like I call them Ren and Sexy. This card is just amazing. Probably one of the, like, I think there's only two mana Planeswalkers. There might have been one that was printed in War of the Spark, but this one obviously is hands down like the best 2-drop Planeswalker ever, and probably the best 2-drop Planeswalker we will ever see. It gives you virtual card advantage by returning lands to your hand, and why that's kind of important is that you have so many of these lands that you can fetch out with like Verdant Catacombs and where is it, Bloodstained Mire and Wooded Foothills, that just getting that repeatable value of just like getting a land out of your deck every turn, and basically like decreasing your odds of drawing lands, is really good. You also have cards like Barrenmore that's cycle for a black mana, so like you could essentially like draw up to 2 cards a turn with Ren and 6, or 2 cards on one turn and then an extra card for like the rest of the game with a Ren and 6. Very very good value. I'm just getting to draw extra cards and see extra cards. It's kind of like um, in the same vein as like the fetch lands, where like you just kind of, in this case, you see more raw cards than you do than you do thinning your deck. You also have Nurturing Peatland as a way to draw cards and something that you can tap for mana instead of sinking mana into it constantly, like Baron Moore and things like that. Also, getting back like Raging Ravines and stuff like that if your opponent kills it if you're on that plan. Um, Ren and Six also really good against humans because it deals a damage to any target. It is like pseudo reach because it is any target, so like you could just ping your opponent and like that can be good enough sometimes, or like pinging them. You know, if you're like a point short, like this is really good, or just making blocks super awkward for your opponent as well. Helping you with your Kolaghan's command and bolts to like target up to like 3 toughness and then 4 toughness respectively. Just inherent like an ability that you wouldn't think would be super impactful, but then like once you start playing with this card and you find those little like lines and things like that, like this card ends up being like really powerful. And of course, like cards in your graveyard or spells, instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard have retrace. Obviously, you don't have to like ultimate Ren in 6 and 7. You can go to 8 with it, and then when you ultimate it, like you can just pick up a land and then cast Lightning Bolt, and that's how you can kill your opponent as well. So like Ren 6 kind of does it all as like a card advantage engine plus a pseudo removal spell and reach, and then a win condition staple to the emblem that you can create with him. Liliana, the baddest lady in the modern format. I don't think she's really in the like. I think with Oko being banned, it's probably back in the top 5, or at least an argument for the top 5 planeswalkers you can play in modern. This card was arguably like the best planeswalker in modern as of like 2016, I would think. Definitely before we got War of the Spark and everything kind of screwed up. But Liliana, making players discard cards. You're probably discarding lands because in combination with Ren and 6, like you can just discard a land, then you can pick up a land with Ren and 6, play the land, and do whatever you can do, cast your spells, so you don't have to worry about actually discarding cards with actual lines of text. A removal spell, normally against like Death Shadow decks, and like Death Shadow is specifically like this card just kind of beats them up. Making them sack like their only threat, making them discard cards when they need those resources to try to close out the game. Boggles when it's a deck that people play, like Liliana just gets around uh, the hexproof by making them sacrifice a creature and things like that. Just really doesn't seem powerful by like 2020 standards, but like still very good and very powerful, and a card that like ultimates very quickly and forcing your opponent to sacrifice a bunch of permanents too, which can definitely put you way far ahead in the deck that wants to 2-for-1 your opponent. So essentially, these are the threats and these are the ways that we're winning the game. So how are we like pushing our advantage and really like trying to stop those unfair decks from beating us? There's one fatal push in the deck, which I think might be wrong, but like it's also playing 4 lightning bolts. Like maybe there's some number that's different. Maybe it should be 3 and 2. But bolt is especially like better in this deck, I will say, than other decks, just because like the little bit of reach you get from your 5/6 Tarmogoyf hitting your opponent a few times. Sometimes lightning bolt's just good enough. Inquisition and Thoughtseize are the discard packages. Inquisition getting something that's 3 or less from your opponent's hand, and Thoughtseize getting any card, but you lose 2 life. Generally, like losing 2 life doesn't matter, and I say the same case with like Assassin's Trophy. Like the drawback to Thoughtseize isn't really a drawback, considering that like you're getting your opponent's best card out of their hand for 2 life, which I think anybody would do in just about any time besides from the times that it would kill you. But obviously, you're not casting it unless you're like planning on suiciding yourself. Assassin's Trophy is a catch-all to like any permanent your opponent plays. Like this gets you a lot of game against Tron, where Jund has a particularly bad matchup in, because Tron has so many redraws and things like that. Where like if you take a threat with a Thoughtseize, cool. You really need to hope your opponent whiffs on like 5 or 6 more draws, on top of like a number of redraws before you can actually like kill them and get them out of the game. Kolaghan's Command is just a ton of value. Like this is basically like Jund's version of Cryptic Command. Like it picks up any creatures that you lost. Like very good at pick like Bloodbraid Elf. Like a Kolaghan's Command picking up a Bloodbraid Elf or like a Tarmogoyf or something like that. It's just already an insane amount of value, especially like getting Bloodbraid Elf, because then you just cast it and then cast another spell for free. Making your opponent discard a card, destroying an artifact. Probably the least 2 used modes on this card now with the banning of Oko, but still nonetheless like very powerful. Situational as they may be, they're really good when they come up, and then also a shock stapled to Kolaghan's Command as well as a way to be able to have a little bit more reach, kill some smaller creatures, go to your opponent's face, You know, I think the classic modes really are just like deal 2, discard a card, or like discard a card, return a creature, or like some combination of those. So like if you're using 3 out of 4 of those modes like consistently, like the card's pretty good. I briefly went over the lands. Blackleaf Cliffs is a land that comes into play tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands, and this is a way that you really get a lot of untapped black mana on turn 1 to be able to cast your Inquisitions or your Thoughtseizes, or even like casting Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt just on other creatures, so you can just kind of like gain control of the board. Playing a decent amount of basic lands, playing the basic forest and basic swamp, and something that's kind of new is like they're playing the basic mountain. And when I say new, I think for the majority of 2019, or at least the last half of 2019 going into 2020, like they had been playing the basic mountain, so you can fetch for it and things like that. Um, so you don't have to like shock yourself with like a blood crypt with life meaning a little bit more, and the deck's leaning more heavily on like these lands that like untap black, but like you pay a life for it, or you know, not playing nearly as many fetch lands because this is playing 8 total between the Catacombs, the Foothills, and the Bloodstained Mire. The deck has now definitely become more preserving your life total and valuing out your opponent, like it always has, but like definitely maintaining a higher life total so that you can race more effectively and things like that. And I think it shows when you're playing 4 lightning bolt, 3 Kolaghan's Command, and 3 Granite 6 that you're in it for the long haul. So you want to try to like preserve your life total as much as possible. Going to the sideboard, I wouldn't look too heavily into the sideboard now, but like there are some really good cards here. Questing Beast is like an amazing creature. Like I would definitely be playing some number of him in the sideboard. I think one's probably fine for now. Fulminator Mage has always been a good card. Just more Jund or more Tron hate, more hate towards like other like control decks and things like that. Like Fulminator Mage is pretty good. Plague Engineer, Humans is definitely rising in popularity, so like Plague Engineer being in the sideboard is really good. Collector Roof, Veil of Summer, Alpine Moons, things like that, all just really good cards that you would definitely want to consider playing in this deck, just because they are, again, very powerful, very good. Whether the numbers on these cards are right, I'm not particularly sure. I like playing Jund, but I usually have someone else come up with the sideboards because they're a lot smarter than I am when it comes to the exact number of things to be playing. And that's modern Jund. This has been a staple of the modern format forever. And while it dips in popularity and sometimes comes back, you know, it never seems like it's ever a really bad option. It's just always never like the flavor of the week. It's always just like the flavor of the format. This is like the premier mid-range deck. Maybe kind of shares the spotlight with Death Shadow now. But like when people think of mid-range decks, like Jund and Abzan are the first two that come to mind. And I think Jund is really the one that is like at the forefront of people's minds when they think of like mid-range and modern, especially the modern format. But that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sorry I'm getting out later than normal. I had it recorded last night and then for some reason my file corrupted. So I appreciate you guys checking out the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'll be posting a Pioneer and a Pioneer and a standard deck tech coming up later this week. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for checking out the channel. Thank you for checking out the video, and I'll see you on the next one.